How is everyone doing? Strength Chat episode 64, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I am joined by the co-owner of the Strength House over in America, Greg Robbins. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. What are you up to? What are you working on? What have you been doing?
Yeah, just like we were chatting before we started recording, life is busy right now. We have the Strength House is doing really well. We're about a year and a half old, so just kind of getting through our first year of operating a gym and changing some things around that we want to do better in our second year, and then we got a lot of babies coming. So my wife's pregnant. My business partner Tony just had a baby in February, so yeah, it's a busy time, but everything is good. All good problems to have.
How long is it before Tony gets his little one in training?
I don't know. Probably as soon as she can walk. She made her first. Made her at the gym this week, actually. So she's only about 2 months old now.
Okay. Do you know whether you're having a boy or a girl?
I'm having a girl as well.
Yeah, all right, okay.
Just a lot of girls, yeah.
I think last time we spoke, it was just yourself and Tony working at the Strength House. You've added a couple more coaches, I think. Am I right?
Yeah, we added one coach in Nancy Newell. So she's been awesome. She's our director of sports performance. So we pretty much split our clientele between I'd say three ways. We do like a fair amount of powerlifting. We work with a few like elite lifters, but I'd say for the most part, the majority of the lifters we're working with are more novice to intermediate lifters. We've helped, I think we counted it up, and we helped like just under about 60 people compete in their first powerlifting meet over the last few years, which is pretty awesome. It's like everyone wants to talk about the training of like the best of the best, and but in order for the sport to grow, we have to make it accessible to everyone and show everyone like what a great sport it is. So even though it probably flies under the radar a little bit more, getting that many people involved in the sport was a really big accomplishment for us. So we have that crowd. We have a lot of, I'd say like adults to young adults who, don't necessarily have aspirations of competing in powerlifting, but they do want to see how strong they can get, and probably kind of do more of that like power building style of training where they're getting stronger and also to kind of put on muscle. And then the other third of our clients is all youth athletes. So we do a lot of high school and college athletes. And Nancy's kind of our star there. She's the one that's organizing a lot of more of their like specific training when it comes to speed training and power training and stuff like that. And then Tony and I can lend our hand in more of like the strength and the assessments and things like that.
Oh, cool! Following the content that you guys put out from the Strength House, seeing I know you post quite a lot of photographs of all the powerlifters that are competing, and it does seem to grow and grow. And over the last couple of years, I think powerlifting in general everywhere has got a little bit popular. I know the powerlifting club that I run, quite a lot of people are coming in and wanting to get involved in it, and some of the competitions in the local area that I'll compete in, some of the competitions are selling out really, really quickly. And like you mentioned about the other end of the population that are just wanting to do a little bit of power building, a little bit of strength training. I think more people are coming around to the idea that strength training is, looking at the research, strength training is beneficial for just general health and getting towards the goals that you want to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're totally right. Even our local meets around here, it's crazy. Like one gets announced and you got to hop on it right away because they're starting to sell out. And what's really cool is, most of these meets are ending up being 2 days long, and the first day is almost entirely women competing. I remember some of the first powerlifting meets that I competed in. I could probably count the amount of women that competed on one hand.
Yeah.
And now, like we'll go to a meet and we're bringing like 15 of our own female lifters. And so I've been to a meet recently where there was I think like over like around 75 women competitors. So
Oh
that's
wow.
pretty awesome.
Yeah. I know I run the powerlifting club on a Monday and a Thursday evening. And on Monday just gone, there was I think there was 8 women and only two men in, which was I thought was pretty good, because it always used to be that the old school mentality, if you like, of women go over and do the cardio side of things. But I think it's great that more women are getting involved with it because they seem to enjoy it, and actually they push the men a little bit more. It's a little bit of competitiveness, which I think is good.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know the numbers exactly, but we probably have at least even, if not more, women like actively competing in powerlifting in our gym, and I honestly enjoy coaching them more so than the men. A lot of times, they're a lot more open to coaching. I feel like they're a little bit more disciplined when it comes to showing up on time and taking their training seriously. Sometimes the men can be a little bit more of a project.
Yeah. I think it's. I know I've done it myself. You want to put a little bit more weight on the bar than thinking, do you know what? Actually, let's drop it down a little bit and focus on a little bit more of technique rather than trying to push it as much as you can all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I could definitely think of some women lifters we have that are, that's their mindset as well. But I'd say overall, if I explain, why we're doing something and the importance of bringing the load down to work on technique, I don't get much pushback from the female lifters, and I don't get pushback from some of the male lifters too. But for sure, male athletes and male lifters always want to put a little bit more weight on the bar, which I'm fine with. Sometimes I think overall I'd rather have coach somebody that wants to go too hard and teach them how to scale back and do the minimum amount to get better.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think one thing I am seeing is as the sport grows in popularity, you're also attracting some people that I don't know if they fully embrace what powerlifting is as a sport.
Yeah.
So they get into it and they don't want to put more weight on the bar, or they're a little timid, and it's like you start to get sore all the time and things hurt, and they're like, I don't know, everything hurts. It's like, well, you might want to pick a different sport then.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone listening who might not have heard of you before or might not know your background and how you got to setting up the Strength House, your own training, and how you got into coaching, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to make it as brief as possible, but I've been a strength coach for over 10 years now, so I've hit that decade mark. I originally started off just being like a personal trainer gym setting. I did that for about 3 years. And then I moved on and started getting my hands into some other stuff. I did an internship with one of the universities around here with the basketball team. And then started coaching at Total Performance Sports, which is a big powerlifting strongman gym out in Massachusetts in the Boston area. And that's kind of where I got introduced to powerlifting more officially, as well as strongman training. Never competed in strongman, but it was good to learn about the different events and how to do them and everything. And I've used that experience with our team sport athletes and our powerlifters in more of their off-season training. And then from there, I ended up as a coach at Cressy Performance in Massachusetts. I was there for a little over 5 years. And it was during my time there that I created the Strength House as an online forum for powerlifting and strength training enthusiasts, and that's kind of where I would publish my own blogs and articles, and some by other people as well. And that was also kind of the home for any online clients, and that started to grow. And then my business partner now, Tony Bonvecchio, him and I kind of collaborated on training the powerlifting crowd online together. And as that grew bigger and bigger, and we had spent a good amount of time as coaches at CSP, we decided that we wanted to do more of that in person, not just online. So we really wanted to kind of blend together, put strength sports and team sport training under the same roof, and that's how the Strength House started. And we opened up, like I said, about a year and a half ago.
Cool. So quite a broad range of skills on there. I know, interesting that you mentioned about strongman. Every time when we were saying there about in powerlifting feeling a little bit battered after a competition, I always toy with the idea of, I'm going to have a little bit of time off of powerlifting and give strongman a go. It never happens. I always go back to powerlifting, but it's interesting to look at another sport. Would you ever be interested in competing in strongman?
Yeah, I've always thought about it, I would say. So I think there's still some goals I have for myself in powerlifting. I'm 32 now, almost 33, but I still kind of want to get as close to a 2,000 pound total as I can, and I'll probably keep pushing at powerlifting until I either accomplish that or die trying. And so certain pieces of me are close to their way out there. And yeah, sometimes the idea of strongman not really including much squatting, sometimes my body seems to want to agree with that. But I've never really dove in. Like I said, I do use some of the strongman modalities in my own training, as well as the training of our members when they're further away from competitions. Like you said, after you do a powerlifting meet, you can feel pretty beat up sometimes, and it's good to move your body in new ways. And I think some of the strongman events lend themselves well to that. Some don't. I mean, there's some brutal strongman events. If you're thinking about things like stones comes to mind, some of the more like odd object events probably aren't the way to go. They take a little bit more skill, and they also take a little bit more out of you. But I think some simple things like farmers carries and different stuff with the sleds and yoke carries and stuff like that is a really good way for powerlifters and certain team sport athletes to build up their work capacity and kind of just their general preparation in line with getting stronger. So we use that stuff quite a bit in the off season with them.
Yeah, I'd quite like to. I completely agree with what you've said. I think I'd like to use it a little bit more than what I probably usually do. And like you touched on there, I like to use it as a little bit of conditioning, building up a little bit of work capacity, and as well, actually, I find strongman quite fun. Really, it adds in a little bit of variation to your training rather than just doing the squat, bench, deadlift, or variations of that when it comes to powerlifting. So yeah, I might have to look and see if I can add a little bit more in.
Yeah, like I said, I think if you talk to an actual strongman competitor, they're obviously going to disagree with me on some level of that. But I think some of the events are a little bit less technical than other ones. Just like in powerlifting, I would say like a conventional deadlift, for example, is a lot less technical than squatting or bench pressing. So some simple things like yoke carries and farmers walks and sled pushes and sled drags, that stuff is kind of nice to do, especially after you've prepped for a powerlifting meet, because that last portion, that peaking for a powerlifting meet and then the actual competition is so much about kind of just the skill of moving really heavy weights and focusing on that skill, that it's nice to do some somewhat heavy training that is a little bit more mindless. Yeah.
There's a little bit less. I'm sure we'll get onto the couple of topics there. But in terms of like coaching cues and everything, there's not, like you say, there's not as much to think about. In terms of, obviously, you mentioned you ended up working at, was it Total Fitness, you said? Is that right?
Total Performance Sports.
Total Performance. And then you got into, more into powerlifting a little bit more there. What was your training beforehand, and was the goal always to get into being a strength coach and coaching?
Yeah, so before I got to Total Performance Sports, my training was definitely not powerlifting minded at all. And I think my sports background helped me out in some respects when it comes to powerlifting, and then hindered me a lot too. I mean, if you listen to interviews and talk to a lot of, some of the really great lifters, one common theme is that they've been doing some sort of lifting of those three lifts for a really long time. Some of them talk about starting when they were as, young as like 12 years old. I was a baseball player throughout high school and in college, and then for a bit after college. So my training, I was always, once I got introduced to the weight room, I didn't really know too much. So I was kind of just listening to what people told me. And, a lot of the advice you get as a baseball player is stay away from back squats, stay away from bench press. So I was doing a lot of, and I was a catcher as well. So I didn't do a whole lot of squatting because I was kind of always feeling beat up from catching. And I didn't do a lot of bench pressing because, I was always worried about my shoulders. So I was doing more like push-ups and dumbbell pressing. And then deadlifting, I don't know, for whatever reason, it just, the people that I was training under, we just didn't do a lot of that. Actually, in high school, my junior and senior year, I was an athlete at Mike Boyle's strength and conditioning in its early days. And so, if you're familiar with Boyle's approach, which is totally fine, it doesn't involve much in the powerlifting aspect of things. So I wasn't really strong in that context at all. And to be honest, knowing what I know now and the strength that I have now, I mean, I just wasn't really that strong at all. I was getting by on skill. I could throw a ball hard and I could hit pretty well. And I was basically using it as a metric to just get in shape. But it did lead to me really falling in love with training, even though I didn't know really what the hell I was doing. I was actually kind of an overweight, chubby kid going into college, and it was there that I started to, really start to train hard and fell in love with the training process. When I was done with baseball, I actually joined the military, and I was in more of a reserve role there, but I did have some about a 6 to 8 month period where I was full-time doing different schools for the military. So my training evolved more towards a lot with kettlebells. I ended up taking like the RKC back when Pavel was in charge of the RKC. I got heavy into that. I did a lot of more, relative strength training, pull-ups, push-ups, a lot more circuit type stuff. My goal was to move my body weight really well. And I think I was weighing in then at about 185 pounds. I could run a 6-minute mile. I could do a ton of pull-ups, a ton of push-ups. I was pretty strong with the kettlebell training. But I was doing more of that stuff. I wasn't even training like in a gym too much for my own training. I would usually go outside with a bunch of kettlebells, some sandbags, some Bulgarian bags, and kind of just mess around with that sort of stuff. So I was in great shape, but, again, not really strong from a maximal strength standpoint. So when I got into powerlifting, I really had to learn everything. I remember the first time I tried squatting, I got my first taste of powerlifting was actually getting in with a group of guys that were doing conjugate training. And, that was definitely not the right place to start powerlifting. We're doing like different variations all the time, hitting max effort days, and I don't even really know how to squat for shit. And, everything's just hurting me. I remember like my knees, I couldn't even sit down for like more than an hour without my knees burning. And I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And then, the more I learned, the more I realized, like, well, my knees just hurt because I'm a shitty squatter. My technique is
Yeah.
terrible. Bench pressing was fine. I got stronger at it, but I really hadn't bench pressed my whole life up until that point. And I was probably like 22, 23 years old at that point. So, that still continues to be my weakest lift is the bench. Deadlifts, luckily for me, was just something that came really natural to me, and that continues to be one of my better lifts. Conventional deadlifting was just kind of something like, showed it to me once, and I was like, oh, I got this.
Yeah.
It just made a lot of sense. It felt natural. But yeah, so when I started powerlifting, I was very green. Didn't really know a whole lot of what I was doing. And so for the first 4 years I was doing that, I was just really following along with training partners and trying to keep, and yeah, that was about it.
Quite a broad range of exercise modalities, if you like. There, do you think, just on a little bit of a tangent, do you think by doing all those exercises, because this is a sort of a conversation that I have quite a lot with the powerlifters that come to the club, and as well the other coaches that I work with, do you think doing all those other exercises, using the kettlebells and the bodyweight training, has sort of made you a little bit more robust when it comes to doing just the powerlifting moves, and made you be able to lift, once the technique has been dialed in a little bit, to lift a little bit more consistently and reduce injuries?
Yeah, I think, yes and no. I think, would I be a stronger powerlifter now if I had, had more specificity in my training since I was younger? Absolutely. But I do think training, I really have kind of put myself through every different kind of training. I've seen body weights as low as 175. I've seen body weights as high as, 250. I've chased a lot of different fitness goals and achieved them. And so I think that makes my tool bag as a coach a lot deeper. And that can definitely help at different points. Like people get a little banged up from powerlifting and you want to keep training, and there's some different stuff that we can do there. And as well as, like you said, yeah, kind of, pulling from all the different things that I've either coached people in or done myself, it definitely has influenced how I look at powerlifting. I think I use a lot of what I've learned in team sports from a periodization standpoint with powerlifting, like having a defined off season and going through different periods of training. That's something that I learned heavily from team sport training. And then as far as like building muscle and having work capacity, that stuff, I think I learned more from, the times in my life where I was chasing more aesthetic goals, as well as, doing some of the military training and, having a good base with relative strength and creative ways to do conditioning as well, because nobody likes doing conditioning. So if you can kind of think up some different novel ways to do that, and switch that, and if you can change them often enough, then you never really get sick of them, and they don't feel like a chore so much.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about you, by trying out all those different things, it helps you as a coach. I know there's a core group of sort of senior coaches, if you like, at the gym that I work at, and then there's a couple of junior coaches that are coming through, and they all want to seem to, a little bit like when it comes to people that are playing sports. I think it's good to people to have especially when they're younger, to play a wider range of sports, and then get a little bit more specific as they get a little bit older. As a coach, I think some people are too quick to try and specialize in one area. But trying out other things, not everyone wants to come in and compete in powerlifting and just do powerlifting. Like we mentioned at the start, some people just want to come in and just get stronger. So if you have a broader range of skills, you can accommodate depending on the person. Obviously, from my point of view, yeah, I love coaching powerlifting. I love running the powerlifting club. But, at the end of the day, not everyone wants to compete in powerlifting.
Yeah, it's true. And, like, if I could go back in time and change one thing, like I wish I did learn about powerlifting, right off the bat, so that at least I could have spent all those years, maybe not training for powerlifting specifically all the time, but at least having phases where I was squatting, bench pressing, and deadlifting a little bit more often, as well as, all that time that I could have spent honing in on my technique as well, because that really held me back early on, was just, learning to get proficient in the lifts. So, I think, that's kind of hurt me at 2 points in my life as a powerlifter. I mean, the first time was I just didn't know powerlifting. So that's kind of out of my control. The second time was, after about my first 4 years of powerlifting, I started coaching at Cressy Performance. And now I was working with team sport athletes pretty much exclusively. And I realized there were some weaknesses in my game as a coach when it came to power, speed, and agility type training. So I kind of shut down the powerlifting for a number of years. I would still squat and bench press and deadlift here and there, but I started spending a lot more time working on my own, like sprinting mechanics and jumps and things like that, so that I would be a better coach for my athletes. And I kind of put powerlifting on the back burner then. So it wasn't until about 4 years ago now that I picked powerlifting back up and decided that, I wanted to take that seriously and start competing again. But I had to kind of, I didn't have to start over. I mean, I was obviously way stronger than when I started powerlifting, but, that was about 3 years or so that I didn't really make any progress, let's say, in powerlifting. And I'm not getting any younger, so that didn't really help me out. But
right. So obviously you mentioned throughout that little bit of conversation that we had about you've achieved various sort of fitness goals, and one thing that keeps being put out, that you keep putting out from the Strength House, is train with a purpose. So how does that? How do you use that to find people's why, in terms of why are they coming into the gym? What are they wanting to get out of it? Just want to chat about, why you think that's so important when it comes to training.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hugely important, if not the most important, especially when coaching other people, is, figuring out their why. There's different people call it different things, like either finding their why. I've heard other people talk about like kind of finding like their pain points, like what's ailing you, and I don't mean that from like my elbow hurts or my knee hurts, but like what is it that you want to change? Like, why are you here? Most everyone is, walking into the gym and they want to be somebody different. That's why they're there. They want to either, be healthier, is something you hear a lot, but when you dig further and further, you're usually getting towards some kind of goal that's more, based on, how they look, or, how they feel from like a confidence standpoint. And when you can figure out, really exactly why they're there, the thing that they don't really want to admit, let's say, once you nail that down and they know that, and also they're okay with being like, all right, yeah, that is why I'm training. I'm training because I'm sick of, walking into a room and feeling like, I don't exist. I'm like this invisible person. I want to have more confidence. I want to feel good about myself and what I do. That powers their training. That's the internal motivation point that you need to find, because as a coach, you can only externally motivate them so much. And especially like those who know me, I'm not like I am like kind of a loud, goofy person in, regular life, let's say. But as a coach, I'm not like a rah coach. I'm not going to like yell. I'm way more reserved. And so I'm not necessarily going to be the one that motivates somebody in that way. It's going to be more helping them figure out why they're here, and then giving them the tools to succeed. So yeah, when someone comes in day one with sort of these arbitrary goals, or at least so they say, we've learned a lot even in our year and a half of business about just sitting down and going over expectations with people, in addition to like motivationally interviewing them. So once we can figure out what it is exactly they want, after all, they walk through our door asking for our help. So I want to know why. Why did you do that? I didn't reach out to you and tell you to come in here. You reached out to me and wanted my help. And then in addition to that, like the expectations part is really huge too. So just being, at telling them like, listen, this is what you can expect from us, but this is what we expect from you.
Yeah.
And that's huge on building, our culture in our gym, as well as, just the training environment. And, like one thing we've started asking all of our new members is, this is what this gym can do for you. What are you going to do for this gym? Because we're not interested in coaching somebody that's not going to make this gym and make this team of people better. So if they can't bring something to the table as well, then it's not the right place to train.
Yeah, absolutely. Just picking a few points that you mentioned there, as a coach that is maybe a little bit more reserved, but finding their why. I think that's motivating in itself. If they know their why, they're going to come in and work towards that goal of the getting down to the roots of what they actually wanted to achieve. Some people, I think it's just down to the type of person. Some people need that little bit more of a little bit more louder and that sort of stuff. But ultimately, like you say, they all need to know why they're there. And 100% as a coach working with a client, it is a two-way thing. And I think it is important to remember that that you are working together. This is the plan that a coach will set out. This is what we're going to work towards. But that person still has to, speak to us as coaches, let them know how they're going on, and ultimately stick to that plan as much as they can, or let us know if the plan needs changing. One thing that you put on there is what you mentioned there is a key word, if you like, training towards. What are your thoughts on people that train and people that just come in and work out, or the difference between training and working out?
Yeah, so that's just kind of a different way to say it, but essentially we're looking for people that want to train, not people that want to work out. Working out is, in my eyes, if someone wants to work out, it's kind of it's less defined. They're not moving towards a specific goal, and because of that, like they're never going to achieve what it is they want, because they haven't really sat down and done some self-investigating to figure out what that is. So it's kind of just this big convoluted idea of just, I don't even know what it is. You have to kind of like sit down and talk to them, really. And
just randomness coming in the gym for right. Just working out.
Yeah, I mean, some people definitely come in and I don't think they know what their why is. And then that's, sometimes difficult, and you got to be careful about like putting words in their mouth and being like, well, do you really want to do this? Is this really what you're saying? Sometimes you got to just shut your mouth and let them think for a second, when you keep asking why, I want to get stronger. Why? Because, and, then they start to, go silent, and it's like, in reality, sometimes they figure out like, oh, I want to be stronger, or I want to powerlift just because it seems to be like the flavor of the week. Everyone else is doing it. My friends are doing it. So I want to do it. And it's like, well, that's not going to power you through those days, closer to a meet prep or something, where everything in your body aches and you feel like shit, and you still have to show up at the gym and train. Like, you're not going to get through those days because you're basically lifting just to fit in. And that's not going to be enough. You're going to have to define something deeper inside of you that you want. Or you might find out then that powerlifting's not what they want, and then that's fine. I'd rather them know that so that we can work on something else. Like maybe they just want to see their abs for the first time, or maybe they're just trying to get their like cholesterol in check or something like that, or just move around better so they can play with their kids or something. powerlifting is not necessarily the best modality to make those things happen. Powerlifting is an extreme version of weightlifting.
Yeah.
So, defining what their goals is, or like, with our slogan, what the purpose to their training is. Once you have that, then you're starting to actually train towards something. Working out is basically, just the people that you see that kind of come in, when they feel like it, go to a commercial gym, check in. They're not really keeping track of anything. They're just kind of doing it. And that's enough for some people, and that's fine. And I'd rather somebody at least was doing that than sitting at home doing nothing. But to the same respect, when it comes to our gym, like, we're a small facility. We can only hold so many people, and we only have 3 coaches that can give their attention to so many people. So, if that's what they're looking to do, then, unfortunately at this time, like, we don't have a space for you here, because we're looking to help people that have some pretty well-defined goals and want to move towards those.
Yeah, I think exactly. If people are working out and it's working for them and they're sticking to it, something is better than nothing. But I completely agree. When people find their why, again, if it's powerlifting or if it's something completely different, I think it allows them to stick to it a little bit more. And it's a little bit more, they're more motivated to come in and get the work done. A little bit like, when you mentioned about the various sort of fitness goals that you've achieved. The goals can change as long as you stick to, working towards that goal, still having that purpose. At the start, you mentioned about Strength House. You started Strength House as online for strength training and powerlifting, and then you wanted to get into a little bit more in-person coaching. Have you found there is a difference between finding people's purpose, finding people's whys, between coaching people online and coaching people in person?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit easier online, just because obviously these people are a little bit more internally motivated anyways. They're not expecting to work with a coach in person. What they're mostly looking for is a well thought out plan and an objective set of eyes to look over their training and say, okay, like, this is the best move next. And generally with those people, you're looking at people that are already a little bit more advanced. I wouldn't say that the majority of the people we work with online are advanced powerlifters, but they're definitely, like, we end up working with, to be honest, a lot of other coaches online. So they're people that want to learn, and they're people that want to, take their personal training to the next level. So their why is pretty well defined in that aspect, and some of that is by design, because when I first started offering online training, I would take anybody and everybody. And, being a coach at Cressy Performance at the time, kind of had that reputation of kind of like the kind of coach that helps somebody get back from injuries and rehab. And, because that was a big part of what we did. And then I started to realize, like, that's really difficult online. I'm not there to really see what it is that we're working on. So I had, one client who's rehabbing a shoulder injury, another one that's into powerlifting, another one who wants to get ready for basic training for the military. So it was kind of like, all right, all these things. At one point, I helped a few women with figure competing. It was kind of like, all right, I've had success in all these realms, so I'm taking on all these different people. And I started to realize that it was hard to it was hard to write all these training programs. It was very long-winded, because I believe that even in an individualized training approach, a lot of it starts from like a templated program. If somebody wants to get better at powerlifting, I'm gonna start them on a pretty generic program. Now I have a couple different templates depending on where they are training history wise and where their goals are, but for the most part, everyone's getting a similar training program. And then as we go through it, I'm starting to modify it based on their responses. And that's where the individualization component comes into play. But when you're working with 8 different people with 8 different goals, you're writing like completely new programs for everybody all the time. It's very time consuming, and it's very hard as a coach to really hone in on your skills and get better at, at one thing. So I started to realize that, and then we started to sort of, say and kind of market our online training to be like, this is for powerlifters or people who want to improve their squat, their bench press, and their deadlift. So finding the why there became a lot easier because the people that were reaching out to us already had that pretty well defined. They knew that what they were looking for.
Yeah.
In person, that's something that we're working on as a gym, is kind of targeting the right audience. But when you're in person, you still get more people through the door that are a little undefined, because your gym starts to get a good reputation, people are getting results, and one friend tells another friend, and maybe the message gets a little bit lost, like, oh, I didn't really know I liked powerlifting, but then I showed up here, and like, say, I'll take I'm just going to give them fake names, but say this woman Jane shows up, and she doesn't really know what her why is. She's kind of getting to that middle of her life, in her 40s, almost 50s, looking to wants to get stronger, wants to have more purpose in her training. And so she starts working with us, and what she does have is the right work ethic. She's a hard worker, so she's willing to do whatever we ask of her. So she starts to get a lot of great results, actually ends up falling in love with powerlifting, and tells her friends, I go to this great gym. And inevitably some of those friends are going to show up and not have the same work ethic as her, and not be into it the way that she is, and not have the same why. So you really have to dig deep and figure that out. So I feel like we're dealing with that a lot more in person than we do it online.
Yeah.
And some of that's our own fault. Some of that is, as I think we're better about that now, especially with like our first onboarding session, really sitting someone down and being like, this is the kind of training we do here. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
Almost scaring them, like being like, if I can give you all these reasons not to train here and you still want to train here, then it'll probably work out fine.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good way to look at it, really. I know I've sort of dipped my hand into doing some more online coaching, and the people that I'll train know what I'm about. I will get people stronger. The sort of I hone my skills, if you like, for basic strength training and getting people, losing a little bit of fat and getting stronger. So they know what they're going to get with that. And when we do have the check-ins, it's like, right, what's the next goal that we're working towards? And I don't have to worry about them not going into the gym. It's just there to keep them on course and make sure that they're following a structured plan. It's quite interesting you say there about, when people are coming in, and give them reasons why they shouldn't train here and scare them a little bit. Sometimes when people come in, I think it's a little bit of a case of they just want to spend their money and be given a magic formula that they end up achieving what they want to achieve. And, going back to what we were saying before, people need to find their why, and it's a two-way thing. What are they going to offer to the gym, and come on and, add to the other group of people that are training there as well.
Yeah. I think Tony and I and Nancy subscribe to the idea that, we're not trying to please everyone. I think, when you please everyone, you end up pleasing nobody.
Yeah.
And so I firmly believe that, if you really want to create something different and special, it's going to take time, and then you're going to really have to hold your line on your style of training and how you go about it. And you're probably going to end up having, half the people love you and half the people being like, saying, don't train there. That place, they're a little psychotic. They have too many rules and too many expectations. And that's fine. I would rather have that, because you can make something really special and serve a lot of people, even if you're only speaking to a quarter of them.
Yeah, I think when you say there, if some people want to train with you and some people that don't agree with it, in the world of coaching, obviously you are dealing with people every day, and sometimes people just don't like that style, or people just don't get on with each other, and yeah, I think that's fine if people don't like my style of coaching, or the training that we'll do. That's fine. I just, a little bit like what you mentioned about if people are working out and at least they're doing something, I'd rather they go off and do something and work towards something, even if it isn't the style of training that that I or yourself do in the gym.
Yeah, and I'd rather refer them to somebody else, because the other thing we haven't talked about is you say yes to that person. You say, yeah, you know what, we can make that work. You can train here. You do that for enough people, and now you got 5 or 6 people circling around the gym that aren't that serious about their training. And what is that doing to the culture and to the environment for the people that are? You're going to lose the people that are, and you're going to lose the people that are just there to work out too, because eventually they're going to lose motivation and not be into it anymore. So now you've lost the crowd that you want, because you kind of watered down your gym, and you lost the crowd that watered down your gym, because that is that crowd. That's a flaky crowd to begin with. Yeah. So when you say yes to everyone, that the hard part is when you start owning the business, is you got to pay the bills, and you got to put food on the table and everything like that. And it's very easy to when someone's standing there with their credit card and they're ready to sign up for a year of training and basically bring in $3,000-$4,000 of revenue to your gym, and you got employees to pay, and you got a family at home, it's like, how do I say, I can't believe I'm saying no to this person? But you got to trust the overall process and say, by saying no to this person, I'm making the gym the better place for everybody else. And over time, I'm going to just keep putting together these people that really want to train, and they're going to be here for the long haul. And it might take a little bit longer to build that special thing, but once the word gets out that this is the place to go if you're serious about your training and if you want to achieve your goals, then you're going to start getting all the right people, and they're going to be loyal, and you're going to have a gym. One thing we talk about is having a gym full of people that we would train for free. That's something we talk about as a staff all the time. Like, we don't really have necessarily like an avatar of like one person, like, oh, we want to have, let's try to fill this gym with 20 Janes. No, it's like, let's make a list of the people we train now that even if they didn't pay us, we would still enjoy training them. And just trying to find more of those people. So those are the people that, we're picking their brains. How did you find us? Do you have any friends that are like you? How many, and then that's kind of how we try to build our clientele.
I think that's I've never really looked at it like that before. I think that's a great point, because I know for me, there's some people in the gym that you just think, oh, you just give them a program. You'd want to help them. You'd want to help them and progress. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. At the start of the chat, obviously you mentioned the sort of three quarters that you variety of clients that you train: the powerlifting, the general strength training, and then sort of the youth athletes, if you like, or college athletes. Just moving on to sort of the different topic of coaching cues. With such a wide variety of clients, do you have any go-to coaching cues that work across the board, or do they all vary?
I think they definitely vary. I guess I'd start by saying that there's a certain style of cueing that we try to do. And so, if you look at the research and also just anecdotally, like what really works well that we found has worked well, it's really trying to find external cues to give people as opposed to internal cues. So like an external cue, if we look at, let's say, like the squat or the bench press or the deadlift, for example, we're really looking at what can we say that to somebody, like what can we ask them to do to the bar, or what can we ask them to do to the floor? Is it pushing the floor away? Is it driving the bar to the ceiling? Things like that are going to elicit better performances. So we try to keep our cueing very external in nature. And that's across the board, no matter what kind of clients we're working with, as well as trying to use like environmental cueing, or basically, in any movement, you have three basic factors in play. You have the person, you have the task that they need to accomplish, and then you have the environment. And all those things work together to produce a certain movement outcome. So as opposed to, just talking about, activating their lats or, squeezing the glutes, how can we change the task so that they can self-organize or figure that out on their own? So like some easy examples would be like if someone's falling forward in a squat while they're learning how to squat, you can put them right up against a wall and say, I want you to perform this squat without hitting your face against the wall or without your knees crashing into the wall. And then you can kind of leave them there and let them figure that out for a while, and just letting them know, hey, I'm here if you need feedback. Otherwise, I'm going to let you sort of figure this out. And we'll do that. That drives a lot of our powerlifting coaching. So we're choosing variations that help work on technical issues in their lifts. So to use the squat again as an example, if somebody's losing tension in the hole, you can do something simple like a pause squat. A lot of times we just prescribe a pause squat because it's like a harder variation, and we figure, okay, well, if they can move more weight and pause it for 2 seconds in the bottom, and that's going to improve their squat. And that's probably so, but we're looking at it more through the lens of, okay, this person really fails their squat because of they're losing tension in the transition from the bottom to coming up. So we're going to use a pause squat so that they can learn to figure that out on their own. Or we're going to use a pin squat so they can learn to figure that out on their own. So a lot of our cueing, like we're actually really big on trying to say less and trying to write programs that do the work for us. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but that actually statistically leads to better retention and better learning that sticks longer than you as a coach just standing there the whole time saying, you fell forward, keep your chest up. You fell forward, keep your chest up. I mean, I like to tell people, like, if there's a certain cue that you're using all the time with the same people, then that's a shitty cue, because if you're always having to say it, then it's not working.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh,
yeah.
It's like, that's a great cue. Use it all the time. It's like, if you use it all the time, with the same people at least, then it's not a great cue.
It's that. I think I've said it before, but the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. If it's not working, what's the point? What's the point in doing it? It's quite interesting, that the more I've looked at this, because I'll be honest, when I first started coaching, I used to say everything. I used to try and say as much as I can, give the client as much information as I could to try and help improve them. And it's like, as soon as you get more than one thing to concentrate on, you're not going to concentrate on anything, because there's too much to think about. And as I've developed a little, more experience as a coach, exactly what you mentioned, letting them figure it out for themselves, or giving them exercises that's going to let them know what they should be feeling and what they should be doing. Going to the example of powerlifting, when it comes to them actually lifting on the platform, you can't give them cues. You can't, you can't coach them on there. Yes, you can coach them behind the scenes, but ultimately when they get onto the platform, they've got to do that lift by themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like what I tell all of our lifters is, come competition day, when you go and take those maxes, it's going to look like the average of every rep that you did in training. And so that comes down way less to cueing and way more to the coach being a savvy programmer, really, and having the discipline to make sure that you're using the appropriate loads and the appropriate variations to really make sure that their technique looks great all the time. Because once that gets heavy, they're just going to do what they always do. And if 50% of your reps in training look like crap and 50% were good, then you have a 50-50 chance of that max attempt looking like crap. And that's not good enough.
Yeah.
Is it going to be 100%? Probably not. But you want to get as close to it as you can. Yeah. So, I think, I'd say about 3 years ago or so, I went to a seminar with Nick Winkelman, who, people might be familiar with. I think he is the head of, all performance related things for the Irish Rugby Club now.
Right.
At the time he was with Exos, Athletes Performance, then Exos. And he gave this presentation on cueing and also on delivering feedback, and it just blew my mind for two reasons. I mean, one, it blew my mind just because the information was just so great, and it was something that I hadn't really thought about. But then, I also think some of the most powerful stuff that we hear in a seminar is actually information that affirms the things that we're already doing well.
Yeah.
And that's what I found. I wasn't a bad coach before I went to that seminar. I was successful. I was a good coach. And hearing him speak and having some science to back up, the science behind motor skill learning, I thought to myself, like, okay, wow, I actually, I do all these things, but I don't do them all the time. Maybe 40% of the time I'm doing these things, and the other 60% of the time I'm just babbling like a buffoon, yelling off all the cues that I know. Yeah. And I'm successful doing it 40% of the time. What if I did it 80% of the time? What if I could get to the point where I was doing it 90% of the time? How much more successful would I be? Yeah. And that just changed my whole perspective on coaching. And to be honest, it's hard. It is so much easier to sit there and, watch somebody's chest fall and respond with, keep your chest up. Like, well, yeah. No shit.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's why I keep going with the podcast and speaking to, more experienced coaches such as yourself, because it confirms to me that I'm not doing things too far wrong, but it also reminds me that, I need to keep working and do more of the good things that I am doing to, make those things that I'm doing every so often my strengths, and doing them all the time. So I completely agree with that. Obviously you mentioned about the coaching cues that, using more external coaching cues. Are there any cues, over the period of time that you've been coaching that you don't agree with, or any coaching cues that you think have been a little bit of a blunder?
I mean, yeah, for sure. I think it would be dependent on the exercise. In fact, I think, Tony and I just released one of our own podcasts talking about squat cues that really don't matter. Some examples were like, keeping your head up, keeping your knees out, different grips on the bar. Like, these things are all dependent on the person, or they're focused on the wrong thing. Like keeping your knees out is one that you hear in the squat all the time. And so it's tough to rattle off and be super specific. But what I can tell, younger coaches is, like, take all your cues and do the same thing that we talked about with interviewing clients. Like, interview yourself. When you say knees out, why are you saying knees out? And, what's the answer? Because I don't want their knees to come in. Okay. So then what you're really saying is you don't want the knees to come in. Why don't you want the knees to come in? Well, because the knees come flying in and it throws off your balance in the squat, and a lot of times it causes you to pitch forward. It's like, okay, so you don't necessarily want the knees out, and you don't want the knees in, so you want them to stay in place. So you want a nice stable knee. Where does knee stability come from? Well, it comes from hips. When the hips are tensioned and you're creating torque at the hips, your knees are stable. There's no such thing as knee stability. You don't train knee stability. You train hip stability, and you get a stable knee that stays in place. So then that starts to change, where you're cueing. So instead of staying, knees out to somebody whose knees are coming in, you need to break it down a little bit and talk to them about creating hip torque and hip tension. And using, whatever cues you like to accomplish that. And, you could probably say the same thing like in a bench press for the elbows. You hear a lot of people talk about like tuck your elbows more, or maybe they're tucking their elbows too much. And then it's, let your elbows flare out, Well, the elbows are moving as a function of what you're doing from your shoulders and your upper back. So you're cueing all the wrong stuff. So, you're seeing visually a joint come out of position, and then you're just saying to them, keep that joint in the position that you want. And that's not enough, because that's not actually cueing them to activate or use the muscles that cause the elbows to move or cause the knees to move. So I wouldn't just, I guess I'm wary to just spit out a bunch of cues on the podcast, because I wouldn't want somebody to just go back and say, I'm going to use this cue because Greg uses this cue. And I want them to actually know why they're using their cue, and to critically think about, what it is that they're trying to get the person to do, and what is that movement a function of, and then coming up with their, basically their own cues for that. And also cues are going to be completely independent. I mean, you could say, you could say anything. If somebody understands what that cue means, then it works for them, but it might not work for someone else. Like you could tell somebody on a squat, like a funny cue you hear a lot from the great Ed Cohen is like, spread your taint. You could say that to one person and they understand it completely, and you say it to someone else and they're like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's a great cue for one person and a terrible cue for the next person. So when you're talking about these, more auditory cues, they're going to be so dependent on the person that you're working with and the relationship and the conversation that you're having with them, that you can't necessarily think that that's not going to work across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. What made me quite laugh about that is, whatever works for them. I can't remember what the client who it was, what they said, but I've trained them for quite a long time, and it was actually this week, and we were chatting through an exercise. There was a new exercise in the program, and we were just having a little bit of a joke about how to do the exercise. And they said something, and I went, if that works for you, if that makes you do the exercise right, that's absolutely spot on. If you understand what I've said, that's it. That's the one that's what work for you. Because everyone's different. Everyone responds better to different things. And yeah, ultimately it is saying or finding something that triggers their brain to think, right, actually, like you mentioned about the knees out in the squat, giving them something that's going to be able to give them to focus on that, rather than trying to ask them to do something that they don't know how to do if the knees are caving in the squat. When you mentioned about the different exercises, obviously you mentioned a pause squat or squatting against a wall. Depending on if the cues aren't working, or depending on the level of the client, how would you regress or progress the exercises to make sure those lifts are better? Obviously, you mentioned that you would program them as well to make them to make them know how to do that exercise a little bit better.
Yeah, I think I do exactly kind of like what you said. You'd have to regress one of two things, or change one of two things, or both things. One is the load on the bar. So like, if they can perform the exercise correctly at a certain weight, and then it goes to crap when you go up to a certain weight, then don't go up to that weight yet. You got to spend more time building volume at a lighter weight. And sometimes it's as easy as that. If it's, something that's falling apart, even at really light weights, then it's more of a motor skill that they haven't figured out yet. And it doesn't really matter, how much weight is on the bar. So you have to regress the exercise. So you might need to just try to find an exercise variation that changes the task in such a way that kind of reflexively they're made to feel and do the right things. So the goblet squat is a really great exercise that we use even with some more advanced people that come in with ugly looking squats, because when you have the weight loaded in the front like that, you have no choice but to kind of reflexively fire your core and keep that braced and in position, and the whole squat just starts to fall into place. And this person may very well have done a goblet squat before, but what they didn't do was contextually relate it to the back squat. So then you have to start just giving them, I guess you could say it's a cue, but giving them like some direction and saying, okay, like while you're performing this goblet squat, I need you to really start to take account of, where you're tight, what you feel. And I want you to try to replicate that under the bar. And so you're building context, and context is really the way that we learn. So if you have a nice progression scheme laid out where somebody maybe goes with a goblet squat and then they go to a safety bar where they can still kind of have a little bit of a counterbalance because the handles are out in front of them, and their squat pattern starting to look really good. If you spend enough time in that goblet squat and then enough time in that safety bar squat, and then you go to the back squat, things are going to fall in line, or it's only going to take some really slight tinkering to get it right. Yeah. But if you jump right up to the most technical version of the lift, and someone has no experience or a bunch of bad habits, it's going to be a battle to get them to do the right thing. And even if you start to get them to do the right thing at lighter weights, I bet it falls apart at heavier weights, and then you're not really training because you can't put enough weight on the bar to have enough stimulus. So kind of using these different variations and trying them out on yourself and seeing the different way they feel, and again really examining why you're choosing these variations, and then explaining to them why they are doing those variations and what to look for and what to feel for, more so what to feel for. Yeah. So that they can start to build context as well.
Yeah, I think that is a big thing, like we've mentioned throughout this, trying to get the people to actually feel what they should be feeling. How far would you, with the actual exercises that you're doing, you mentioned there quite a lot about using the goblet squat and the safety bar and putting them into a program. How far would you regress an exercise to make them know what they actually should be feeling? Just because some exercises, if you dive them straight into a back squat and they struggle, they're just going to they're just going to train bad patterning, and ultimately later down the line they'll end up injuring themselves. How far would you regress the exercises to make them, or depending on the person, to make sure they know where they should be feeling it and to make sure that the form's correct?
Well, I guess I would regress it as far as it needs to be regressed to make sure that they can get into the correct positions. And that's going to be dependent on the person. When you're working with somebody in person, you might just need to regress something for a moment. You might just need to run over, grab a plate or a dumbbell and knock out a few goblet squats and just give them a reminder, and then go right back into the back squat and things clean up. Maybe you even use something even further removed. Like maybe they're just having trouble, creating hip torque. So you just get them out from under the bar, you get them in their squat stance, and you start cueing them, how to turn their quads away from each other and where to feel tension. And then you put them back under the bar at an appropriate load, and you say, now do the same thing. When you're working with someone online or from a distance, sometimes you accomplish the same thing. It just takes a little bit longer because you're not there in the session to decide that the regression looks good and now it's time to apply it. So you might have to say, okay, well, for 2 weeks, we're going to, safety bar box squat to work on this pattern, and then we'll go back to the back squat. And so you might have to, you're not there to intervene and kind of speed up the process. And that's fine. It's just a little bit longer process in that sense.
Yeah, what I ask is that, sometimes people will, as soon as you give them a regression, they sort of think, oh, well, why have you taken that exercise away from me? And it's again, from like we mentioned before, of the using the why of why the client is coming into the gym, but also from a coach's point of view, why you were doing this to make you to take a step back to then, take 3 or 4 steps forward to get you stronger. So yeah, I was just curious on your thoughts on how far would you regress it. I completely agree. Regress it as far back as the client feels that they can feel what they should be feeling when they're doing the exercise. Just on the note of regressing exercises, obviously looking at some of your own training and what you use at the Strength House. What are your thoughts on accommodating resistance and bands versus chains?
They're a tool. They're not something that we use too often, I would say. I prefer with some of my better lifters not to use accommodating resistance, but I do place a huge importance on the idea of compensatory like acceleration training. So using an appropriate load somewhere between like 70 and 80% and working on moving that weight really fast. I think that's a huge part of getting stronger, is learning to be more explosive in that weight range. The traditional sense of like dynamic effort training, borrowed from like the conjugate sense. You have the bands and you have the chains, and that's become synonymous with speed work. But I think really all the work you should be doing once you have a good foundation technically is speed work. You should be trying to move every weight as fast as possible. So sometimes I'll throw bands and chains in there. I probably lean towards chains a little bit more, but not so much in the sense of like trying to have that speed work. I'd rather have more weight on the actual bar because I think it's more specific to what they're doing. But I do think chains can have their place in some lifts, especially like variations. So like we're doing like a pause squat or something like that. I might throw chains in because it's just too heavy for them to pause it, for 3 seconds in the bottom and then have a good amount of load to squat back up into. So chains are a good way to bridge that gap. And, it's lighter while they're pausing it, but then the chains pick up as they explode up. So I would say I actually probably use chains and bands less now than I ever have. I think I thought that they were something that was necessary to train the speed on the lifts. But then I realized that really what was going on was we were just using weights that were too light for speed work. And so people were inevitably kind of decelerating the weight to control the lockout. And, that's where the bands and the chains could come in, because you could say, well, if you add the bands and the chains, then you can, accelerate through that lockout position. But then the weight on the bar is just too light, I think, for raw powerlifters during the majority of the movement. So now it's more about 70 to 80%, maybe even as high as 85%, bringing the reps down and the sets up a little bit more so you can have much more quality repetitions and trying to move those weights as fast as possible.
Yeah. How often would you use bands and chains within a training program, and how far out from a powerlifting competition?
I mean, it really depends on the person. I've used, like in my own training, the last meet I did, I was doing some safety bar squats mainly for my squat volume because of a little nagging elbow issue. But I was using some chains on my pause SSB squats pretty much right up to the competition, just because I felt like I could use more weight overall. with the pause. But in general, I'd say, if I have the bands and the chains in there, it's probably for like a 4 to 5 week, like microcycle and, or mesocycle. And then, we're pulling them out, and yeah, closer to the meet, we're trying to get as specific as possible. So bands and chains don't really have a big place there.
Yeah. It's just it goes through phases. When I set up podcasts, try and look at areas that I've seen in the gym that I work in that people are using, and seeing what other people are asking questions about. And it went through a phase where I didn't really see anyone use bands or chains, and then it's just come in a little bit more. And I was just curious. I'm sort of the mind with you that I do prefer the chains to bands, but again, like a running theme throughout the whole podcast is knowing why you're using them. Don't just use them because they look good.
Right. Yeah, you gotta have a really firm reason for why you're using them, and if you can justify it and you feel like it's working, then go for it. Who am I to say not to?
Yeah, absolutely. So quite a broad range of topics through there. I've really enjoyed that chat of a lot of from coaching cues to accommodating resistance and regressing exercises. For everyone listening who might want to follow the content that yourself and the Strength House put out there, where can people find you and get in contact with you?
So probably the best place is, I don't post too much on my like personal accounts as far as strength training goes. So just following the Strength House. So on Instagram, we're at the Strength House. On Facebook, we're the Strength House, and our website is thestrengthhouse.com. So that's where the majority of our training information is going to be posted. I think we're probably most active on Instagram, or at least you can use that as like a gateway to get to anything else we post.
Awesome. For everyone listening, 100% check out the Strength House. I've been following them since they've set up, and they really do put some awesome content out there. I really enjoyed that chat. I hope everyone listening enjoyed it as much as I did. I almost forgot to say this, but Greg, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from everything that we've chatted about today?
I think we kind of just touched upon it, but I would say like critically examine why you're doing things, and seek out like the whole truth. So don't just necessarily do something just because I said to do it or because somebody else said to do it. Investigate and figure out why they're doing it. Like dig deep and really figure out why a training modality is set up the way it is, why someone's using a specific cue, and then run it through your own personal bullshit detector and decide if it's something that you think is going to work, or apply it to a person specifically that you think it's going to work with. And I think that way you'll start to really come up with your own training philosophies, and when somebody asks you why you're doing something, you'll actually you'll have a solid answer for it. Awesome.
Thanks a lot for taking the time to speak with me, Greg. Really enjoyed the chat. Hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. Thanks a lot for everyone listening. Thanks a lot to you, Greg, and I will see you all next week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.